Well, it's good to be back with you here at Christ Table as we continue on through our study of the book. My name is Kevin Young, and I have the privilege of serving here at Christ Table as lead clergy. If you'd like to know more about Christ Table, you can visit the URL that is right up there in the corner of the screen, www.christstable.today. If you'd like more information about this study in particular, then go ahead and visit that one that's right there, go.christstable.today/the book. There are a couple of resources there. One is a PDF that gives you a schedule of all of the days, all 24 in this study, and all the passages that go along with it. But then there is a second larger download there, a PDF study guide that has every day's reading. It has some background material to help you understand what you are reading. It has questions to go deeper or to have conversations around your table, and even has questions there as well for youth and for adolescents. And you can get that for free there at that website. And if you'd like a printed copy of it, we have these really nice printed copies of it there as well. And whenever you get those, you actually help us continue to keep bringing the Bible studies to you. It's a way to financially support us here at Christ Table, and we appreciate that a lot. In fact, we need you, and so thanks for being a part. Now, this week, over the 4 days that we've been here, we've been looking into one particular book in the Bible's wisdom literature, which is kind of its poetry section, and that's the book of Job. And Job, we've found, is actually kind of a really difficult book that doesn't necessarily paint God in the best light. God makes a bet with Satan that a really good guy will, even if he loses everything, not hate God, not essentially curse God for that happening. And Satan says it's not going to happen. So everything gets taken away and his life is made miserable. All his kids die. He loses all his money. Everything's destroyed. And it was really sad because even his friends and his wife end up kind of turning on him. And the entirety of the book of Job is all of his closest friends and his wife just saying, come on, the jig is up. You're somewhere or other in your life or hiding something. You're not as good as you want us to think you are. Just admit it. This is why all the bad things happen. And Job is like, no, God can come down here and defend me. And eventually God does come down, but he doesn't defend Job. He essentially kind of says, who do you think you are? And so when we find ourselves in this final section, restoration, in Job chapter 42, verses 10 through 17, God has kind of said, deal with it. And Job kind of says, okay, I'll deal with it. And then makes a speech or two in response to God, and then everything is given back to him new. And there are some difficulties with that. We were having a book club last night about that, and somebody pointed out, which I think rightly so, is if all of my kids were taken away from me and they died, like, new kids don't replace old kids. And this is one of the difficulties of the book of Job, and there are a lot of difficulties in the book of Job, especially if we don't take it as a story. But even if we take it as a story, it still presents a lot of really difficult questions about God and about suffering and about humanity, and they're not easily answered. So here, the end, Job 42, verses 10 through 17. When Job prayed for his friends, the Lord, it's early. The Lord restored his fortunes. In fact, the Lord gave him twice as much as before. And whenever this was so he got twice as many kids as before. And I'm always thinking, what about the old kids? You know, as a kid sitting there hearing this message, it's like, I don't want 2 kids to replace me. I don't think this is a happy ending. Then all his brothers and sisters and former friends came and feasted with him in his home. So those relationships were repaired. They consoled him and they comforted him because of all the trials that the Lord had brought against him. So now apparently it's common knowledge that the Lord had brought those challenges against him in this book. And each of them brought him a gift of money and the gold ring. So the Lord blessed Job in the second half of his life even more than in the beginning. For now he had 14,000 sheep and 6,000 camels and 1,000 teams of oxen and 1,000 female donkeys. And he also gave Job 7 more sons and 3 more daughters. And he named the first daughter Jemimiah, the second Keziah, and the third Karen-Hapuk. And in the land there were no women who were as lovely as the daughters of Job. And their father put them into his will along with their brothers. Job lived 140 years after that, which puts him in the length of time of life, as is said of the patriarchs, the great patriarchs, living to see 4 generations of his children and grandchildren. And then he died, an old man who had lived a long and full life. But sadly, we're not left with a happy feeling after having read this book. We're left with some difficulties and even more questions. Just like in the prologue, where there's this curtain revealing moment between God and Satan, where there's this bet that goes on that the rest of the story is kind of predicated upon, that left us with a lot of questions about why they would present God in that way. And now here in the end, we're left with even more questions, which I kind of pointed out along the beginning of this journey in the Bible study here. So the beginning of the book and now the end of the book doesn't wrap things up nicely. It leaves many questions unanswered. And I think that that's something that we have to wrestle with, is why. And so when you're doing your Bible study today and you're looking at this, that's one of the things that I want you to wrestle with, is why are so many questions left unanswered? And are there questions that are answered? And if so, are they satisfying? And why are those the questions that are answered? One of the things that I have noticed, though, and I want to make this point before we go and move on from the book of Job next week, is after Job submits to Yahweh and faithfully carries out his directives, after Job says, yeah, you're right, I don't deserve to know those things, I'm kind of a nobody, you're God and I'm not. After he carries out the directives of God and demonstrates a gracious and forgiving spirit and praying for his comforters, those friends, and his wife, Yahweh restored Job's fortunes. And I want to point this out because it does seem as though that Job's restoration kind of comes a little on the basis of Job kind of following instructions. You know, the book of Job, and I think that this is a very unique perspective on the book of Job that I don't hear a lot, is that really in the book of Job, Job tends to be the God figure in the book. And God himself in the book of Job kind of seems to take the role of humanity. And so it's a little bit in this, kabuki theater, it's a little bit where roles are reversed here, a little bit, where Job is the hero and God's the questionable one. And for fortunes to be restored, a lot has to occur. And I wonder for you, I wonder where you are in this idea of suffering. I wonder how you feel about the suffering that comes into your life. Who receives the blame? What do you do with that? Is it your fault? Is it humanity's fault? Is it God's fault? Is there some way to avoid suffering? Those are difficult questions. Those are deep questions. Those are ones that will keep us up at night in the middle of trauma and trial. And Job seems to indicate that the world is complex in such a way that we just simply cannot understand at all, or God's role in any of it, or God's role outside of it. Bad things happen, and humanity has tried to wrestle with the relationship that God has with bad things and suffering. And no one's come up with a solution that is completely satisfying. And so Job may have been wrapped up with a happy ending, But your life, unlike Job's, is real. And my life, unlike Job's, is real. And we can't live in the fairy tale, especially when there is pain and when there is suffering. But it seems as though one of the things that we can know is that even though life is complex, and even though we may not understand it all, and even though we may not agree with all of the outcomes, God is present. And Job, if he is a type of God, a type of Jesus figure, shows us maybe how far God is willing to go. Well, until next week.